Okay. Okay. Why? Okay. Okay. Hello. Okay, I think. Yay. Let me make sure I can. Okay, I'm going to unmute you.
Test.
Oh my goodness. Thank you both so much for your patience. This has been an intense day. Just to give you a little synopsis, I live in what people would consider the modern day wilderness. And not only did I lose my internet for the past few days, I also dropped cell service today, which is also strange because I do get cell service in certain areas, and for whatever reason it just completely went out. So I was climbing mountains to try to get my internet provider, who has to drive down these dirt roads to get to this satellite. And I thought it was just the modem, but we had to run wires and it's dark. And it was just, I can't even believe that this happened, that this actually worked out. So I want to just thank both of you for your patience. And momentarily, I will, we'll go on to Facebook Live. I'll start recording this, but I just wanted to say hello and take a deep breath because the gentleman just left my little cabin and is going home wherever he lives. So hi everyone. Hello.
Hi.
So thankful. Maya and Samuel, how are you both this evening?
I'm doing great. Let me close my door real quick.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that you got it settled. So it sounds like a horrific day.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I also work remotely with 15 other people. I'm the executive director of this organization, so it was pretty intense just knowing that people were on the other end of the internet and I couldn't get to them. And then I think I realized like, wow, I knew I relied on the internet, but I think it made it that much more apparent to not have it for a couple of days and the trouble that it got me in. So before we start, just to let you know, I'll do a little intro, and then we'll go. I'm gonna say an intro. I'll introduce you to. You have logged into another device. Okay, interesting. And then no. Okay. Oh, interesting. Huh. I wonder who. Okay, hold on. Let me just tell Mara, who's been setting this up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Mara, everything is working and you can log off.
Yep, she's gone.
Oh, there she is. Okay. She clearly got that. Oh, she probably heard me. Oh, goodness. That's how. Yeah. But anyway, so I'm going to start with an intro and then we can go into conversation. And, I probably will just allow both of you to speak on the first question. And then as we go into the conversation, you can both respond to either of the questions. If one of you are saying, I'll wait to the next question, feel free to answer whatever you're feeling most impassioned to answer. Any questions?
No, I just see the word mute. Can you hear me speak when I speak?
Yes, I can
Okay.
hear you speak. And Samuel, I think I don't know if Sam, you intended to be on mute, but you are muted right now.
Yeah, no, I'm
Oh, you
muted.
did.
I've been typing. There's been some awesome things happening for the campaign. So people have been a Twitter, literally.
Oh, okay. Well, and that's a good note too. Like if there's noise in the background, you can always mute yourself when you're not speaking. That's a good thing sometimes. So any other questions? No, okay. I'm actually going to go to the bathroom really quickly, and I would, if anybody else needs to grab water, do that. This is a good time, and then when I get back, I will start the Facebook Live, which will take a few seconds, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, Samuel, I was just up watching the various returns on elections.
Oh, yeah.
So it sounds like you're heavily involved in them. I'm just watching it as a spectator, and it's good to see some of the things happening.
Well, I mean, it is a spectator sport at this point. That's what our political processes have become. And that's unfortunate because I think back to, I don't know, maybe even as far back as I'd say maybe even Clinton, maybe even Bush, which I guess isn't too terribly far behind. But there was some gravitas to the elections. There was, you had to be mature, you had to be a statesman, even if just pretending. And now it's just, pardon my French, a shit show. It's, I mean, you have Trump in office, and now all holds are off, right? It's really good for those of us who have been kept silent for so long, because now the things that we're saying aren't being treated as, he's insane. Wait, no, wait a second. Common sense. What is this you speak of? And so a lot of politics is has become something that it maybe always should have been, but to this, I want to say caricature. I've never thought I'd see the day where so in high school, right, we would read about World War II, we'd read about the rise of Nazi Germany, and we'd be like, yeah, every single male in there would be like, I'd be America, I'd be fighting Nazis, punching them in the face, killing them for America. And now they're marching in our streets, and people are like, well, come on now. That it's their First Amendment right to speak. And I'm thinking, what world did I live in? We're fighting for women's rights. We're fighting for civil rights. We're fighting for or against xenophobia, LGBTQ rights. We're fighting for every single social movement we've been reading about in the history books, even cowboys and Indians. The DAPL protest, that's ongoing, and it's all happening now, 2016, 2017, going into 2018, and I'm like, I take back what I said about I wish I could be there and experiencing it, because, well, be careful what you wish for. But I'm glad to know that I'm on the right side of history even now, because that's the biggest fear. Oh, I wouldn't let that bother me. And then, then of course, but, a lot of the people, they don't understand that Trump is reading straight out of the playbook of Mussolini, Hitler, Stalin, all of them. And it's happening and people are oblivious. Oh, no, that's not happening. And it's like, yes, it is. So
wonderful. I'm excited for this conversation.
Sorry.
Like it's going to be, it's great. Okay, so I'm just going to take us live on Facebook, and then I'll start recording, and we'll just take a few moments.
Is this coming from a page of yours, or is this your personal page?
No, it's coming from the For the Wild page.
Okay. Let me find that, and I will share it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, so
5,000 likes?
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay.
Okay. Public. All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to be really dissecting the last year of Trump's administration, and I'm really feeling full to have this conversation. Also, please go to forthewild.world to find this interview. When it's done, it will be up along with our podcast. Also, we are fully a nonprofit now, so this is a listener-supported program, and please make a donation if you can. So as we're joining together, it is the 1-year anniversary of the election of Donald Trump, and all of us at For the Wild really felt called to make space for our community to gather via the interwebs and to reflect on the political unraveling of the last 12 months. We exist in a time of great collective pain and confusion, where the veil of a just American democracy covets multidimensional untruths and relentless elitist agenda serving only a small minority at the expense of human diversity, as well as lands and waters and the atmosphere that sustains us. So guiding us in this discussion today are two individuals who each really hold unique vantage points of the current political predicament that is the Trump administration. Thank you, Maya Van Rossum and Sam Ronan, for being with us. So I'd like to start by really thinking that, I think that any discussion that is pertaining to American democracy must be rooted in an acknowledgement that this democracy was founded upon the plundering of land and the subjugation of human and plant and animal life. And the morality of this muddled entity that is the United States is vague. On the surface, it's conveyed a great nation upholding the right of all life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yet underlying this facade is a backbone built on human exceptionalism and white supremacy, a backbone that is increasingly exposed and dissected as we collectively awaken to the ways in which this democracy does not serve us or the earth. to me, the presidency of Donald Trump is a frantic expression of the capitalist patriarchal paradigm, acknowledging that it is on the brink of collapse. A deteriorating system clinging on to its fading power by assaulting our rights, our connections, and our life-giving lands and waters. So these assaults are manifesting in many forms. The defunding of climate research, distorted media narratives, the diminishment of the already negligent public healthcare system, attempts to privatize our sacred public lands, the glorification of the fossil fuel industry, the acceptance of bigotry and police brutality, the loose antagonization of foreign leaders who hold nuclear weapons, the demonization of hardworking immigrants. This interconnected and, this very heavy list continues on, as many of the listeners and both of you know. So what I want to focus on as we open this panel is the policies that the Trump administration has put into place or has plans to put into place that harbor irreparable or rippling consequences for not only the American people, but all people around the world. And in the context of a changing climate and biotic collapse, or the mass extinction that we're going through. So would each of you begin by sharing what you consider to be the most globally and long-term threatening aspects or policies of the Trump administration's agenda?
Maya, would you like to take this one? Okay. Well, so thank you for the introduction and thank you for setting the stage. Quite frankly, it is a very somber discussion to have, and I thank you for that. One of the things that people may not know about me is that I went to DAPL not once, but twice, and both times days before my actual election was to be had. And I did that for a reason. I felt strongly, and I still do feel strongly, about the DAPL pipeline infringing upon native lands. This isn't the 1800s anymore. This isn't the War of 1812 or the French and Indian War. This isn't any of that. This is modern day America. This isn't the days of Andrew Jackson. This is the United States of America in the year 2017, and we're still playing cowboys and Indians. Worse, law enforcement are being upheld as saviors or as protectors when they went over there and assaulted men, women, children, and the elderly who were fighting for clean water. And make no mistake, that pipeline was infringing upon Native American lands, treaty lands no less, but it wouldn't have just affected those people. It would have affected everyone that was needing that water. And all the cities and the towns that would have been affected were in the thousands, if not millions of people. So to say in anything other than the strongest of gravitas that there's a war against our earth, and the policies that are being pushed by this administration are detrimental to not just our country and our morality, but our future. What are we the country of if we are the country of ashes and death? A nation is supposed to protect and to provide, right? A country is supposed to ensure that its people survive and prosper and persevere through the ages. We can't do that if we're drinking poisoned water. We can't do that if we can't grow crops on our soil. I mean, the breadbasket of America is California and the entire Midwest. When they are called flyover states, they are being completely disregarded for the vital part they play in our country's well-being. So I'm right there with you. And as, if I may, as a congressional candidate, I feel very strongly about our environment. Why should we rely on fossil fuels, outdated technologies that are over a century old, when we have clean energy alternatives today? Solar, wind, water turbines. We could be doing any number of things to prevent this havoc that is being wrought upon our country. And yet, those aren't the lobbyists who are winning in Washington.
So that's a really great, unfortunately great lead into just my thoughts about the question of what is Donald Trump's biggest threat to our earth, to our nation, to our people today. And I really think it is all the way around, the attacks on the environment. And unfortunately, it's not just one attack. At every turn, Donald Trump really is looking to not just roll back environmental protections that have been put in place over the years, but advance devastating practices, devastating industrial operations we know to be a threat to the future of the earth, like doing anything and everything he can to advance dirty fossil fuels, to reinvigorate the coal industry, to make it even easier for drilling and fracking operations, fracking and drilling for oil and for shale gas to advance, for the construction of pipelines and other infrastructure that results in more drilling and fracking, devastating more communities and more environments. So I just think all the way around, it really is his assault on the environment. And if I had to focus in one area, which is practically impossible, it really has to be the advancement of dirty fossil fuels. And I think my biggest concern, I think, as you pointed out at the very beginning, is that Donald Trump is really assaulting every aspect of our civil society right now. He is taking steps to infringe on civil rights, to infringe on property rights, to infringe on all the rights that we hold dear, to infringe on religious freedoms. And while we have not done a good job using the law over this short period that he's been in office to hold him accountable for all of those infringements, there is at least a mechanism to which the people can turn to. If you have an infringement on religious freedom or on civil rights or on the right to free speech or the right to freedom of the press, there is an ultimate authority that people can turn to, the Constitution, the constitutional protections in the Bill of Rights of the federal Constitution. One can grab onto those and bring legal actions to try to hold the president to account, which is particularly important in this day and age when we have so few legislators in office that are willing to do that. Unfortunately, when it comes to the environment, there is no federal constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And in fact, when you look at state constitutions across the nation, there are only 2 states that have a meaningful constitutional provision that can be used to hold state legislators, state government officials accountable when they overstep and infringe on people's rights to a healthy environment. But as we all know, at the federal level, you don't have that. So when it comes to the assaults on the environment by the president and by members of Congress and by the regulators working for them, as long as these government officials can make the case that they are acting under the color of law and take that a defensible position, that they are complying with the law in all of these actions they are taking, we, the people, are left with no tool to hold them accountable. And that is why, as you know, I'm working on this movement. I have a book, The Green Amendment, coming out, and it's all about pushing the concept of passing meaningful environmental rights amendments in every state constitution across the nation and in the federal constitution, so we can hold these government officials accountable when they overstep and violate our rights to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment.
I was going to say, may I chime in on that? So, Maya, what you were saying, how there isn't a constitutional provision for clean energy, clean water and land and all that. It's in the preamble, the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Life requires clean water. It requires land that can be arable. It requires that the air can be breathable. I think in many ways, people want to interpret the Constitution for their own ends. I mean, just take the Second Amendment, for instance. People want to say, oh, everybody has the right to a gun, and the Supreme Court has upheld this time and time again. But what they fail to realize is there's the first half of it, which is a well-regulated militia. Not just the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. And so when these lawmakers, like you said, aren't being held accountable, especially the president, which it still gets a little bit of, you get where I'm going with that. It's just simply not true. The problem is, and I believe it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said it, those who want peace must learn how to organize as effectively as those who want war. And in many ways, the war against the environment is the ultimate war. Yeah, there's thermonuclear war. Yeah, there's war against terror for lack of a better word. But the war against our own environment, a people cannot sustain itself off of ash, off of poison, especially if that poison is the water and the air that we breathe. So I would say that people need to start realizing that this life and liberty thing also includes their right to clean water and to clean air and land that can be, that can be harvested for food. It's a little late over here, my bad.
Yeah,
but
I think,
Please go, mine.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Yes, people do learn that they have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I agree with you, absolutely. To be able to avail yourselves of those promises, you have to have a clean and healthy environment. But the fact is, the right to a healthy environment is not in the Bill of Rights. And that's where that is where we need it to be. And we don't want to be in a position where we have to try to manufacture arguments to craft a way to be able to use the Constitution to hold the president accountable. What we really want to do, what we really need to do, is have a Green Amendment movement that sweeps across the nation where everybody is having the conversation, that they understand that their rights to free speech, their rights to bear arms are better protected than their rights to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And we need to mobilize to pass these constitutional provisions at the state level, at the federal level. And just the act of getting people to understand the reality that while we believe we have the right to clean water, the truth is you don't actually have a right to know that when you get a glass of water from your faucet, that it is going to be free of toxins that could contaminate your body. That right is not protected at the constitutional level, which is where we need it to be truly acknowledged. So getting people to understand that reality, getting them to understand that the laws that we have in this nation, while when they were first passed began the job of reducing pollution inputs, at this point, they are far from doing the job of protecting our environmental rights, and in fact are entirely crafted to allow pollution, to literally permit pollution by giving permits to industrial operators to spew pollution into the air, into the water, into the soil. And getting people to understand, though, that we can change this by passing constitutional provisions in the Bill of Rights sections of our federal constitution, of our state constitutions, that will truly honor all of our rights to a healthy environment. That entire process, getting people to recognize the problem with the law, the deficiency, that the reality that you don't actually have the right to a healthy environment, then to demand it, to fight for it, to actually secure it. And when we have those constitutional provisions, to use them to hold our government officials accountable, that entire process is incredibly powerful. And I think that it is, you know, when I began writing the book and advancing this cause, it was well before Donald Trump was elected to office. But I can tell you, the day after he was elected, it became very clear to me that it was more important than ever that this project get done and off the ground and out the door, because people were going to need something to grab onto. And my hope is that this gives people something truly meaningful, legally strong to grab onto and to mobilize around, so we can use it against this president, because he really is devastating, not just our lives, but the lives of future generations yet to be born. And we need constitutional provisions that will hold him to account for that and stop that.
Thank you, Maya. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's, I think there's a lot of convoluted understandings of what's really happening. Whether, the media, the way that the government wiggles its way through getting out of being held accountable, allowing polluters to keep polluting, whether they pay for the disruptions or not. And so I think absolutely we need tools. We need tools that are more than just petitions. We need tools that are more than just protests, because ultimately what that's doing for us is just having us, the people, begging, please, please, please stop. Please, please, please don't do this. Please clean up my water. But that isn't actually holding any weight. It's not actually pushing us forward into creating a just transition into renewables, a just protection for the environment. I mean, we're looking at public lands being opened back up. And while we're on the topic of the environment, I want to talk about COP23, I think it is now, in Bonn, Germany, that's happening right now. And I don't know how familiar either of you are in that. Maya, are you familiar with what's happening in the climate talks that Trump is trying to pull out?
A little bit, but not enough to be the expert on it. So if you or Samuel are the experts, then I will leave it to you.
Well, I
Unfortunately,
thought
I don't either.
right. Well, just to bring up this environmental debacle that we're in as a country and as a globe. So this is a place that's a meeting of the nations that happens every year. COP21 was in Paris last year, was in Morocco and Marrakesh. This year it's in Bonn, Germany. And so this is supposedly trying to set up these agreements between nations to curb their fossil fuel consumption. And although Obama did have the United States into this Paris climate agreement, Trump is actually trying to pull out. But there's this play-by-play going underneath, because it's he basically wants to make, what I've heard is he wants to make the agreement so loose that there can be all of these loopholes. And it's really, so everybody gets excited, oh, we have a climate agreement and we're going to move forward and we're going to curb climate change. But in all reality, it's just another way of pushing the fossil fuel agenda. And so I think we really need to talk about specifics. You know, what specifically is Trump passing? Because I think, you know, we can talk about theory all day long. We can say Trump is coming in and he's harsh on the environment, he's letting fossil fuels burn more, or Trump is coming in and he's trying to take away certain human rights. But I want to know from both of you, what do you know for certain? Like, what are the policies that you are most worried about that we can actually put our finger on and we can look at, and then we can start discussing what are ways that we can work against those things?
Well, if I may, Maya.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for leading into that one. I just did a very quick Google search, Trump anti-environmental laws, and the second thing down was 52 environmental rules on the way out under Trump. It's a New York Times, so I imagine it's vetted. Looking at this, and just recently what's been going on, so for instance, the hurricanes that have been hitting our country, 4 back-to-back hurricane level 5s hitting us on both sides of the continent is not natural. That's not normal. In fact, I think what was being said was Hurricane Andrew, which was one of the most devastating hurricanes in US history, was barely the size of New York City. These hurricanes are superstorms. They're the size of states. They're the size of Ohio. They're the size of damn near Texas. And they are hitting our shores with a vengeance. And it's because of this climate change. Now, when you go into seeing the things that he's gotten rid of, flood building standards, let's see, the freeze on new coal leases on public lands, methane reporting requirements, anti-dumping for coal companies, the Keystone Pipeline, all these, I mean, let me find another good one, the Green Climate Fund contributions, mining restrictions in Alaska, all these things that were put into place to prevent this excess of carbon emissions into our atmosphere and our oceans are just being ripped away haphazardly. And guess what? There's an ExxonMobil former CEO that was at the head of the EPA. I believe it was that guy. I think he has since been replaced, but even so, we're getting these oil people in charge of environmental cabinets in our government. That makes no sense. Furthermore, we're giving subsidies. We're giving $80 billion and more in subsidies to these corporations so they can continue to do what? Pollute our atmosphere, make profits off of our tax dollars? It doesn't even go to the point of necessarily needing to pass a constitutional amendment, although yes, that is something we need to do. It's about getting people with a conscience into office so that that could even happen. One of the biggest issues we have is that in the southern states, they are so red. They're so dominated by the Republican Party and that extreme rhetoric that it just supersedes everything else. When you talk about needing clean energy, it's immediately turned into hippie, immediately turned into socialism. These bad words that have been used for decades against people of the left, people who want to improve the country for the greater good and for the future generations. And Yana, I believe you and I are both millennials. We have a vested interest in the future of this nation. That's why I'm here doing what I'm doing and why you're there doing what you're doing. If we weren't doing what we were doing, who would? I mean, that's the honest question. Most of our generation is trying to live their lives, trying to make it in this dismal economy. And guess what? When I was in the military, active duty as can be, I was just as tunnel visioned as everybody else. And politics didn't affect me. Why? Because I had a roof over my head. I didn't have to worry about a paycheck because mine was coming every 1st and the 15th of a month. And I was getting BAH and BAS. I was getting every benefit of socialism through the military. So then when the government shutdown occurred, right after the Great Recession, actually the second recession that happened in a 4-year period, while we were barely recovering and it just took us right back down to square one, it woke me up. It just told me that the people in office do not care about you and me. And that's the fundamental problem. There is no morality anymore in government. It is only about cronyism. It is only about appealing to your donor base and to the lobbyists that control you. We have weak individuals in government, and that's the problem. Weakness is proliferating in our country's politics, and that is exactly why we are in the places we are. That's why Trump won, because he has a bunch of yes men supporting him. I mean, the only people that are actually fighting against him on his administration is General Mattis. And I believe, can't think of his name right now, but the founder of Tesla, he was on one of those cabinet positions and left because he just couldn't deal with the nonsense. But Mattis was right there when he tried to disbar the trans community from joining the military. General Mattis said, no, I have the email that I received on my .mil account stating from the defense or the Secretary of Defense that this is not the military we aspire to be. We believe in equality. We believe in service to our country. And until we get some codified actual direction from Congress that they pass this, we are not barring anyone from joining this great military. And that's the kind of leadership we need. Unfortunately, you can count them on one hand. General Mattis, Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard. I would try and throw Elizabeth Warren in there. And it's not that I have anything against her, but she seems to be a politician of convenience rather than a stateswoman that we need. So when we have so few names, so few voices fighting for us, currently elected in office, I mean, there's Ro Khanna, there's Tabby Duckworth, they're great, but they're not vocal. They are vocal when it comes to their certain niche concerns. But what we need is we need someone that's willing to kick down the door. We need more Bernies, we need more Tulsis. And you know, in that line of thinking, we have Tim Canova, we have Stephen Jaffe, we have Lindsey Brown, we have James Connolly, we have all these progressives running as Democrats and Republicans who are fighting for you with that progressive agenda. And that's what we need to embrace. You talked about mobilization. You can't have mobilization without knowledge, and without knowledge, you can't have the understanding of what's at stake. Unfortunately, our messaging, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Conservatives are very good at messaging. They are very good at propaganda because it is far too easy to tear something down than it is to build it up. So that has to be our goal. We have to be just as good at building the propaganda for building up as they are for tearing down.
So that's great. I totally agree with you. And getting people into office is so powerful and important. And Iana, just thinking about your question of something specific, some specific things that are happening. So just talking a little bit about one of the areas where I work. One is trying to defeat and prevent drilling and fracking operations for gas in shale, right? And but another aspect of that is trying to battle back the infrastructure, the pipelines, the compressor stations, the liquefied natural gas export facilities that the industry is working fast and furious to be able to build through communities so they can take that fracked gas from one endpoint to another. And often the other end, the actual endpoint is in nations overseas, where the gas gets liquefied and then it gets sent overseas to other countries for sale because the shale gas industry can get much more money selling that gas overseas than it can here in the United States of America, right? So we have this propaganda that we need to frack for gas from shale because we need to be energy independent. We need to have more energy here in the United States of America. one, there are clean energy options, so that's a false narrative. But the other false piece of that is the truth is most of that gas is destined to overseas markets. But something that Donald Trump is doing, so he's working very hard to advance the fossil fuel industry. As Samuel mentioned, he immediately approved Keystone XL and took steps on Dakota Access to get those. Those were oil pipelines. In the world of shale gas, natural gas, I hate to use the word natural gas because it's anything but natural, the process to get it out, but natural gas that comes from shale, the laws that govern the construction of the pipelines that are built to deliver that gas from the wellhead to the end user are very dramatically pro-industry. And so the entity that regulates those pipelines is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Under the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and for pipelines that are regulated by FERC, for short, all state and local laws that apply to those environmental protection laws that apply to every other industry don't apply to those pipeline projects. When FERC approves those pipelines, the pipeline company immediately gets the power of eminent domain and gets to take people's property rights in public rights to public property as well as private property, so that they can cut those pipelines through wherever they want to cut them through to construct them. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has only in 30 years denied one of those pipeline projects brought before its FERC commissioners. They are an incredibly biased agency. Despite the fact that the pipeline companies have this protection from state and local authority, despite the fact that they have this incredibly biased pro-industry regulator helping them with their pipeline projects, Donald Trump is taking steps to make it even easier for FERC to approve pipeline projects and for pipeline projects to get all the approvals they need to get through. There is, for example, while state law is preempted when it comes to these pipeline projects, under the Clean Water Act, the states do have the capacity to say no to these fracked gas pipeline projects under a provision of the Clean Water Act called Section 401. There are multiple movements in the Congress supported by Donald Trump that would strip even that limited level of authority from the states to protect our environment, to protect our communities, to protect people's property rights. That is one example of something Donald Trump is doing right now to help the fracked gas industry get their pipelines built so they can engage in more fracking. Donald Trump right now, through that FERC agency, that pro-industry agency, through his Department of Energy, is trying to pass rules that would give more money to prop up the coal industry, because the coal industry right now can't compete well. And there are gazillion reasons for that, but there is no future in coal. Because there's no future in coal, and so these coal businesses are going out of operation, Donald Trump's Department of Energy is trying to pass a rule that will literally hand money over to the coal industries to help prop them up so that they could stay in business, because if they didn't pass that rule, those companies would go out of business. So it's another way he's trying to prop up the fossil fuel industry. So if people want to think about, if they're trying to figure out, like, where is one area where I can get engaged? One thing I could suggest is one place to get engaged is on these fracked gas pipeline projects and this incredibly biased agency called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, because FERC allows pipelines and pipelines allow fracking, and fracking results in all of that environmental devastation. I have organizations in 35 states across the nation that I work with that are dealing with this agency, FERC, and with these fracked gas pipeline projects. So my guess is that the majority of people that are watching this right now live in one of those states and is therefore at risk of one day having a pipeline targeting their property. Because most of the communities I work with, they're not thinking about fracking. Fracking's the thing that happens way over there that's not going to impact me unless I'm socially minded. But what these communities are finding is they are not safe from fracking because those pipelines are targeting them. And when those pipelines get approved, like I said, that power of eminent domain kicks in. So a whole bunch of communities that thought they were safe from that industry, I mean, set aside climate change and all those other impacts, but thought they were safe from the direct impacts, now are finding themselves in the direct path of a pipeline. So just thinking about one area of focus, thinking about fracked gas and pipelines and FERC and how Donald Trump is trying to empower the industry not just to devastate the environment, but to take property rights too, right? And infringe on that constitutional freedom is just one area.
And to your point, people don't really take heed of this until it affects them. For instance, there was a provision by the state legislator in Ohio that wanted to frack the Ohio River. So that is right next to my district. In fact, I believe part of my district does have the Ohio River flowing around it. And so when people started to realize, whoa, you're trying to do this to our river? No, that's when the foot came down. Earlier than that, there was the Keep Wayne Wild protest where, again, there's pipelines trying to be put through our natural forests and our national parks, state parks, what have you. And again, for pennies on the dollar, there's an initiative, an auction, I believe in December or January, where you can go online and bid on land, public land, to privatize and to do whatever you want with it. I had half a mind to start a Facebook initiative to raise money so that we could buy our own lands, which doesn't that sound rather counterintuitive? We have to buy our own lands to ensure its protection and survival. So I think to your point is the messaging and what is happening with the Trump administration all the way down to the local level is bringing it home. Do you want to drink this water? And let's bring it to another level. Flint is still without clean water. Has nothing to do with fracking or oil, but it has everything to do with a lack of funding in those natural resources, in that plumbing, in that city. It's still toxic. We can't lose sight of, yes, the oil and the fracking is very real, and it's using our clean water to pump into the ground that causes what? Earthquakes of all things. Oklahoma has had maybe 5 earthquakes a year that were very nominal. Now it's 35 a week. We're destroying our lands in the most fundamental way. We're letting our people literally die from contaminated water, and nobody takes up the mantle or the torch until it affects them. So to your point, it's about getting that message out there. You're right. It has to be a public and it has to be a grassroots effort. The Our Voice Initiative app that's available on the Google Store and on the iStore in beta is a canvassing app. And what it allows you to do is literally download this thing. Where's my phone? Lost my phone. Okay. Can't use I like using, what do you call it? Props. You could literally go on your phone. You could go out right now knocking on your doors. I live in an apartment complex, so there's at least 200 people right there. And you can be like, hey, so I'm just trying to get a pulse for what you think of. And you click on the button and it pops up the questions and you say, hey, what do you think about fracking? What do you think about having your water supply contaminated for cheaper gas? People are going to be, no, I'm absolutely against that. It's like, well, but the cheaper gas. Yeah, but I like to be able to drink water and be able to bathe my children or take care of myself in some way, form, or fashion. These are the ways we can do it, and the tools are readily available. The problem is, and again, it goes back to MLK, we do not know how to organize, or perhaps we're not aware of all the other organizing efforts around us. And so it must be imperative that we work together as networks, and that we don't necessarily focus only on our one effort and push all others aside, but welcome them aboard. For instance, if you took your book and put 6 or 7 talking points in that questionnaire and went around with it, and Planned Parenthood joined you, and Black Lives Matter joined you, and the Women's March joined you, and then the next day or the next week, you turned right around and supported their efforts, that is how we get to the bottom of it. That's how we reach people, because it's going to take people to reach people. Otherwise, we rely on those very few moments where we do get on CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News and have our 30 seconds to get it all out before they, shut us down. And that's good in that we can maybe sometimes get our media coverage, but we have to do it at the ground roots, at the grassroots level.
I absolutely agree with you, Samuel. I think that we need to take this into our own hands and support each other. And when we're talking about climate change and environmental issues, we need to look at how are these really intersectional with social justice issues. And it's not just an environmental issue, and it's not just a Black Lives Matter issue, and it's not just a woman's issue. It is all interconnected to each other. And I absolutely agree that we need to support each other. And you brought up this idea of networks. So you have that one application, but as you know, as you're in your own campaign, how are you seeing the most effective ways of bringing people together around these matters to have more power, so that we don't have to rely on big media or even rely on members of Congress to listen, but we can actually prop ourselves up?
Well, like I was saying, it's all about the grassroots. Now, unfortunately, in Ohio, there isn't as strong of a progressive community. There are progressive organizations that do their individual thing. It's getting them to work together is the struggle sometimes. And unless there's like a major event, such as Richard Spencer wants to speak at the University of Cincinnati, that has the entire progressive community in the southwest of Ohio working together to somehow create an event to counter that. So what we need to do is, in general, find who these leaders are, find who these organizers are, and just talk to them like, look, Planned Parenthood, I have a tool, I have a device, I have an organization at my back. We should work together. And I know you work with DSA, you work with the Working Families Party. I know you work with Democrats, women's rights, the whole 9 yards. Why don't you talk to them, rally them together, and let's have a big old event. Just downtown Cincy, we get all of our networks to spread the message, and we all show up at once. And we can even have it so that there's several speakers going at once, so nobody's left out. The thing is, what I've noticed is people are afraid of being co-opted. And this has been since before my DNC chair race and post my DNC chair race when I founded Our Voice. People were concerned that I was creating this thing to take over the movement, and that's not the case. It's about creating a platform with which we can all collaborate and talk on. And that subtle difference, networking and collaboration versus let's do this, it makes a difference. And I've noticed that more people are open to the idea of, okay, a toolkit, this app, this website, this database, this directory. I like that. I want to contribute to making it better. What do I do, or how can I get more out of it? Well, the more people participate, the more information we have. That is the beauty of political parties. It's also the bane of political parties when they become corrupted. So you have the Republican Party, which, conservative values. But what is conservative? I think Eisenhower, I think FDR, I think Roosevelt when I think conservative. I think taking care of your country first and then worrying about the other stuff. Reform is what liberal should have always meant, of doing what is broken but making it better. Taking what is defunct and rebranding it, rebuilding it into something that works. That is what classical liberalism and classical conservatism should be. So you have to, I guess, reach people at those levels. How can we work together? It has to be a conversation, because too often people get, I don't know if turned off is the right word or cautious is the right word, but it's one of those two. You have to be careful when trying to find your allies, even if you are natural allies. And that's been the biggest struggle. We are all in this together. Your particular focus is getting a constitutional amendment passed to guarantee clean energy, clean water, and clean air. And that's phenomenal. But that doesn't mean that women's rights isn't just as important, or getting proper gun control is important, or eliminating gerrymandering, or getting money out of politics. All these things are intertwined, because if we don't get rid of gerrymandering, we can't get people elected that want to end police brutality, which means we also can't work with the groups that are trying to get these clean energy initiatives passed. Look at Wolfpack. Wolfpack has been working across all 50 states for several years now, trying to pass a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. And how much success have they had? They have had a little bit here, a little bit there in these very blue states. So what we got to do is take what they're working with, add it to the other things that we're doing, and work together simultaneously. It has to be an overall approach. We outnumber.
Yeah, but wait a second. But I think that it's being, no, my thing isn't passing constitutional amendments. That's not the one thing that I'm doing. That is the one thing I wrote a book about. And I wrote a book about it because I believe in it as an important vehicle for environmental protection, for community protection, for social justice, because when you have a properly framed constitutional amendment, it means that social justice issues get much higher level of protection, which does exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about. It talks about working across communities in ways to provide mutual benefit and help. And the thing that we have to be careful about, right, is everybody is working so hard and all of these issues are so important. And when you have a community that's fighting to stop fracking in their town, or you are in a city that is experiencing the earthquakes because of the injection of frack wastewater, or when you are working in a rural agricultural area where they're fighting to stop a pipeline, there are two things going on. First off, these communities that are suddenly under attack, when it comes to environmental issues, social justice issues, energy issues, the interrelationship between them, suddenly people are much more open and wanting to learn. Because before, when they weren't really thinking about what's the value of a wetlands, or they weren't really thinking about what are the ramifications of fracking because it's not near my town, suddenly when they're being directly impacted, they're much more open to learning and wanting to learn. And I think that it's an incredibly powerful moment to teach people, to mobilize people, to get them to work together on their issue, but then also to take that platform and do, just like you're saying, to help widen the view for them, widen the lens to see the connectivity between the issues. And so there is this great opportunity to bring together different movements to work together. But it's so important to do it in a way that it's mutually beneficial. Because, so you have to explain to the person who's concerned about breast cancer how or why your battle for environmental protection is meaningful to them from a breast cancer perspective, because perhaps the toxins that you're talking about are toxins that cause breast cancer.
Exactly, and that's exactly the point.
Right. But the important thing always, and because I work with this a lot, is it's also, and I'm not saying that you're not doing this, I'm sort of speaking just generally, to be really sensitive to the reality that when people are under that assault on their communities, on their environment, they are overwhelmed. I mean, these battles are huge, and the learning and the action and the mobilizing, if they're going to do civil disobedience, learning how to do that, how to do it right, and how do you deal with that emotionally. There's so many aspects to it. So one of the things we also have to do when we're thinking about how to empower and mobilize people and get them to work across issues is, one, making sure that they want to work across issues because it's mutually beneficial. It's not just we're all good people doing good work, so let's all do something at the same time. But let's see the connectivity and let's make a common message that advances both of our causes. But also it's just really important to be sensitive to the fact that these people really are under assault. And it is overwhelming. And they are suffering in terms of their time, but they're also suffering emotionally because it's a real shock to the system to be treated this way by your government, by your neighbors, by your local officials. And if you lose, by the devastation you have to experience when the forest is cut or the industrial operation goes up. So I agree with everything that you said, Samuel. I just wanted to add that additional texture to the conversation. Because I think sometimes people out in the world, when they're thinking about it, don't really realize, or maybe don't at the forefront of their minds, just process that reality. And it's important that we all do that going into these situations.
And to your point, that's the, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Maya, for bringing that up. And I absolutely feel that we have to take account for the emotional toil that this is causing and the grief that is inevitably going to come up. And actually, hopefully the grief comes up because it's something that I believe that we need to be able to feel, to work through it and do it as a community, being actually able to feel the depth of the Anthropocene, the depth of when fracking destroys our homes, our lands, our waters, our children, our own health. And I think, how can we also shift that perspective, that empathy and support to people who see things differently than us? Like, if you're Democrat, then how are you able to look at a Republican and say, we are both humans, and what has caused certain people to vote for Trump? I mean, it may be out of pain. It may be out of this sense of feeling hopeless or lost or looking for some type of savior that can come in and take them out of a hard position. And I'm not being an apologist for Trump supporters. What I'm trying to do is zoom back and say, how do we get more people on board? And I'm not talking about liberals. I'm not talking about conservatives. I'm talking about human beings who are connected to life itself, who are connected to the animals and the plants that we all share this earth with. How do we actually connect on a deeper human level where we're not ostracizing, we're not demonizing, but we're able to deeply see people, acknowledge people for where they're at the same time, though, hold our integrity and hold the truth. It's not to say, oh, it's okay, they had a hard childhood, or, oh, they're having a hard time. No, I mean, these things are really real, and I think we do need to have accountability and a sense of justice. But I think there's so much emotional wounding that is behind how Trump got into office. And if we aren't looking at that, then we're really missing the actual, probably most powerful component that is driving people, which is this deep wounding and separation that leads us to choose leaders who are dangerous or abusive, for that matter.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I totally agree with everything you said. And I think also, just to go back to one of the things I was saying, that in that moment when people are under threat of some new something, right? That really is a moment when they have incredible open-mindedness. If they're faced with some serious health cancer or something, they are more open to wanting to know, how did this happen? And if you can, and looking at what are the contaminants around them and how that came to be. Or like I said, if their property is about to be taken for some pipeline or industrial use. So it is, as you say, going into, I agree with you, having empathy and understanding, but also recognizing what I try to do in my work is recognize when I have people that are under that threat. Not only do I have people willing to learn and wanting to learn, but I have people incredibly open to learning and seeing those bigger picture connections, and seeing how their politicians have let them down on, as you said, that very human level, because they suddenly realize, I really care about forests. I really care about water. Oh my gosh, I really care about my front yard, my backyard, and I don't want an explosive pipeline there. And then they want to learn, well, why is that pipeline going here? Oh, it's going here because of that fracking operation. Oh, why is fracking bad? Oh, I get that. So many of the communities I work with, particularly, I work on a broad range of issues, but seeing as we're talking about energy, so many of the communities I work with in these pipeline battles, the very first meeting, I can't tell you how many people come to these very first meetings, they say, well, I know we need that fracked gas, but, or, well, I know that exports are a good thing, but, or, well, this pipeline's really bad if it's in my backyard, but it's okay if it's over there, in that community or that backyard. And when you talk to them about how the pipeline is causing the fracking is causing the pipeline, what are the ramifications of the pipeline itself, but what are also the ramifications of the fracking for the communities where it's happening, and talking about that in real terms about people's drinking water and the quality of their lives and the devastation to their health that's happening, they start to get it because they're open to understanding. And how many of those people, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months down the road, I hear them at a hearing, and the ones that were saying, I understand that we need this fracking and this gas because are the ones that are right up front and center and saying, we don't need fracking. We don't need this gas. Clean energy is here today. And they've totally flipped their understanding of the issue and of their world in this very fundamental way. So I think that as horrible as what we are experiencing environmentally and socially and in terms of justice issues and civil rights issues with Donald Trump, I think it's also creating a moment where we have a whole lot more people willing, wanting, and open to learning and better understanding the world and these cross connections.
So I definitely don't disagree with anything you've said. The one caveat, and what was brought up, I believe, in the initial question was, how do we reach people? You can use any one of my campaigns as an example. I'm running, or I ran for state representative in an 80-20 Republican district. I was a little naive to think I could have won as a Democrat, but what have you, right? However, when I was knocking on those doors, and I knocked on a bunch of doors, trust me, and I had plenty of conversations. I think some 20-odd thousand doors is what I knocked on in a 5-week period. Trust me, I went through some shoes. Every time I spoke to somebody, I just went up to them and I said, hey, my name is Sam Ronan. I'm running for state representative. I'm a veteran, and these are the things I believe in. And within that first 30 seconds, minute, 2 minutes, it was nothing but, yes, can't wait to vote for you. You're definitely a Republican, right? No, I'm a Democrat. It's like, oh, well, I'm sorry, I can't vote for you. But yeah, but you're a Democrat. But no. The problem isn't so much that our message, the message of clean energy, the message of fighting for a future of not just the next 5 years, but the next 50 years, the next 5 generations, that isn't a message that is lost on mankind at all. It's definitely something that resonates in the hearts and minds of Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and everybody else in between. The issue is the identity politics. So how do you overcome that? Well, in my case, there really wasn't any overcoming it. I would have had to have ran as a Republican in their primary, which I would have done, but that's a different story. What I'm doing now is that I've finally experienced a state level race, a national level race, and now something in between. And what I've noticed is populism is on the rise. And I mean the good kind of populism, not this neo-Nazi, white supremacy, ultranationalism. I'm talking populism, the thing that people really want, to take care of one another. So how do you reach them? Well, we can wait until, it comes knocking on their door and it bludgeons them over the head and then they wake up. Or we can try reaching to them in their vernacular. And that's what I've been doing. That is also very difficult to do, because if I'm running as a Democrat, speaking to Republicans as a Republican, but say I'm a Democrat, that confuses them. It makes them think I'm just trying to, blow sunshine up their skirt or something like that. And that's kind of the problem. So you have to take away the politics. You have to take away all of the partisanship. You need to say, look, I have a letter next to my name. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm going to tell you my name. I'm going to tell you what I'm fighting for. And if you like it, look for me on the ballot. If you happen to disagree with the letter next to my name, and that's what makes you change your mind, then maybe you should reassess what matters to you. I'm being unapologetic progressive. I am fighting for universal healthcare, universal education, clean energy, revitalizing our infrastructure, expanding the 15% tax rate to all incomes 100,000 and below to encompass the entire middle class. Whether you live in New York City or you live in rural Ohio, you will be taxed the same and you will be able to live an equitable life. This is how we reach people. And my congressional district is very unique in that it encompasses that 80-20 district, but also parts of Cincinnati. So I am almost running 2 different campaigns where I talk about progressivism the way Eisenhower did in Warren County, and I talk about progressivism in Cincinnati the way I am now. It's just a matter of how do you reach the audience, right? That's the most important thing about communication, is knowing your audience. And we can sit here and be like, green energy, why are you so stupid about the fracking? Like, come on, there's research. Donald Trump, why are you so stupid? We can go there. I've been there, I've done that. In fact, there might even be a few clips on YouTube where I'm saying that. But that isn't how you reach regular people, because they're already used to and experience the attack of their intelligence and of their patriotism and their willingness to be a part of a greater future. So what I did, what I've been reaching out to is finding out how to translate progressive into Republican, moderate, and then of course liberal. And I found that it has been vastly more successful talking about universal healthcare by discussing Medicare for all, by talking about how the difference between Medicare for all and the insurance industry is that you're still paying out of pocket, you're still paying a monthly fee, except one is your taxes that are coming out of your paycheck, and the other is after taxes and addition to, and you're not even getting all of your benefit. Whereas with Medicare for all, you're getting your entire benefit for pennies on the dollar of whatever it is you make. And if we expanded it to everybody, your taxes wouldn't go up because intrinsically it's already covered. Again, going back to the who can message better, that is a mouthful. If you guys, if somebody watching can help turn that into a 30-second, 10-second soundbite of getting it in there, call me, all right? Email me, sam@ronanforcongress.com. Please, I will use it and I will share it as far as I can. But that's the issue. You have to have conversations with people who aren't already on board or who are on the fence. You can't just give them a soundbite because there isn't one. Because what we're talking about is far more than just a soundbite. It's easy to say, oh, baby killer, because they're pro-choice. And it's easy to say that, oh, they want to take away your rights and freedoms if you're pro-gun control. You know, my views on gun control are very simple, and they come from a military background, so just please take it with a grain of salt. We deal with weapons of actual mass destruction. We deal with things that are designed to kill you for the purposes of killing you and defending ourselves and our brothers and sisters in the battlefield. Our mission is to fight and to kill and to die. That is what it means to serve in this military. And yet, somehow, we don't commit mass murder on base every single day. Security forces doesn't pull you over and gun you down in your seat because you're black. Because you were speeding. They have restraint because they have been trained in the proper handling of a firearm and respect the deadly nature of that tool. And it is a tool. I have a 9mm in my closet. Guess what? It hasn't gone off. It hasn't hurt anybody. Hasn't gone and walked off its, on its legs and started massacring people. Why? Because I have it secured. I'm trained with that weapon. I have a concealed carry. I'm trained with that weapon. Too many people take it for granted. They don't respect what it can do, and therefore they don't treat it with the respect it deserves. Same thing with our environment. They don't treat it with the respect it deserves because they don't see the ramifications of their actions. You can see these videos of the penguin covered in oil or the turtle stuck in the little plastic, pop holder things. And you can share it on Facebook and be like, oh, that's so sad. But that same person will go right out with their F-150 and do burnouts, or buy a 6-pack of Coke or bottles and not cut the loops. The issue is reaching them in a way that they can be reached. If I was trying to have this conversation with you in German, you wouldn't understand a damn thing that came out of my mouth. And trust me, I could have this conversation in German. That's the problem. When we speak about clean energy, when we speak about the environment, it's instantly a different language to these people. And I don't mean that negatively. It's just that's not their concern. So you have to make it their concern in a way they understand it. You're worried about clean energy. Oh, you're worried about the bad air. Have you ever been down to Dayton or Cincinnati in the middle of rush hour? Have you ever decided to just pull over, get out of your car, and just take a deep breath? What do you smell? What are you breathing in? You're breathing in death. You're breathing in poison. And then they'll think about it. You know what? You're kind of right. Here, there's another one. Arnold Schwarzenegger himself did this one, and I was rather impressed by this. What would you rather be locked in a room without windows or any sort of air ventilation? Your Shelby GT500, Eleanor, right? The American muscle, going full throttle, all 8 cylinders, just a blaring, making you all happy, or a Tesla? Every single person says a Tesla. Why? Because they know it's not going to kill you. Whereas the American muscle, the American dream, will kill you within minutes. So it's about finding that message, that verbiage that resonates with the people you're talking to. And I've found that just talking about regular things is the best way to get a hold of people. And yes, using different vernacular. We can talk about universal healthcare, clean energy all day long, and in our circles, we're on board. On moderates,
I don't think anybody, though, here is disagreeing with that. I mean, I think that that's really how any good activist or politician, community member or neighbor does it. You have a conversation with people, you try to reach people.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's also the reality that there are some people that you're never going to reach.
True.
And that's okay too. And then you don't spend time on it. And there's also the reality that it doesn't matter if people really care and understand and appreciate. If you've got government officials that are putting in place or perpetuating laws that allow the devastation to continue, and we have industrial operators with greater access, or as you said yourself, you know, that are in charge of the very agencies that are supposed to be regulating industries, like Rex Tillerson and Scott Pruitt and Neil Chatterjee, all these very pro-industry folks, they are running the government right now. And so we have these industrial operators that are in power and or have great access to people in power, and therefore have laws that are already on their side and are increasingly on their side as Donald Trump and his cohorts roll back environmental protections. So I agree with you. It's part of we need people to understand and appreciate the full breadth of things and talk with them in a way that they understand. But I think we also need to recognize the reality, which you do because you're running for office, recognize the reality that when we have a government in place, that is not a government for the people, but it's a government for the industrial polluters and the developers. We're always going to be in a losing game.
And that's where the message comes into play. And I have to hit on it. And it's not that I disagree, because we're fighting it left, right, and center. There was a gentleman, and I can't remember his name right now. If you haven't noticed, I'm terrible with names. He explained to me why messaging is important and how crafting a message to deliberately push certain people away will allow you to bring more people to your side. This is the fundamental difference between Republicans and Democrats, the left, the right, whatever you want to call it. Democrats try and create a message that everybody can nod and be like, yeah, I agree with that. And then are shocked when they lose elections because the Republican is not even bothering trying to reach the middle. They're saying hardline whatever nonsense they want to say. And what it does is because it's such a contrast to one side or the other, it draws people to the contrast because centrism isn't necessarily something that resonates with people. It's something that people understand and grasp. And when we're talking about issues, if we're trying to reach them about, oh, this issue 2, this issue 1, this, fracking is happening in our city, let's talk about it. Yes, the center message is what you go door to door with. But when you're trying to fight for that actual policy change, you have to be hardline. And this is the difference between the other opinion. And what we don't do well is recognizing there's a difference between that middle and that left without actually pushing away everybody would be in the middle. And let me clarify a little bit here. I said earlier that if we talk about universal healthcare, we're going to turn off a lot of people. We will, because that hasn't been readily accepted yet. But Medicare for all is. That is something that everybody can get behind. Everybody knows what it is. It's America's #1 favorite government policy. Sorry, losing my words here. You get the idea. Medicare for all is the closest thing to saying the words universal healthcare that we're going to get to and be able to hit it home time and time again. Fine. That's one battle that we're not going to arguably win, but we can hit it home hard. Whereas the Republicans are going to be like, no, we got to do privatize, privatize, privatize. No, Medicare for all is already there, and this is why. It's a contrast. The reason why John Ossoff lost his election is because he did everything in his power to align himself with his opponent, short of declaring himself a Republican. If people are going to vote for a Republican anyway, why would they vote for the slightly lesser Republican? You need true contrast. And when we go out there in our messaging, we do it too aggressively. And let me clarify again. We are hammering home the horrible, horrible things, talking about enemy, talking about this is the problem, talking about this is the destruction. We need to talk about what's being built. This is the difference between their destruction, what they're advocating for, and what we're trying to create together. And it's when you add those together in that building, that's when the message resonates. That's why fundamentally Bernie Sanders is the most popular candidate in the country, because he talks about building a future versus the Democratic go-to is like, well, we're not them. We have a great message and we're going to talk about this message, but we're not them. So with us, with this grassroots, we have to do something close to what Bernie does. We have to be, this is the future that we can be a part of. And adding more of that we is what resonates in these communities, which can offset the need to let them get hit in the face with it. That, I hope that clarifies.
Yeah. So go ahead, Yvonne.
You're muted.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, in the environmental work that I do, and in the organizations with whom I work, I think people do a really great job at speaking very truthfully and honestly about what is the harm that's being inflicted when you cut a forest, when you destroy whatever it is that you're facing, and also do an incredibly good job at putting forth that powerful, positive, alternative option. And as a result, I think that environmental advocates, when you think about just issues, environmental advocates are incredibly effective because they do speak truth to power, but they also bring this positive message and vision forward. It doesn't mean that you have to solve the problem, because it's not always the job of the people to solve the problem. You know, you might not know how to undertake some activity, to how to build the whatever industrial operation, or build the thing that's gonna solve the problem, but you have that better vision for the future. And so I think environmental advocates are very good at that. I think from my perspective, when it comes to environmental issues, one of my biggest concerns with politicians and politics is that people aren't true to their convictions. As you said, they're trying to give lip service to a concept and trying to use all the right words that they think are going to resonate with this person or that person, rather than just speaking the truth and earnestly and honestly from their heart. And I think that that's what a politician like Bernie Sanders does. I think that why he resonates, it's not just that he has this positive vision, which I think he does, and this much better inclusive pathway for helping to move communities in the country forward, but he's genuinely authentic. I mean, I think even George Bush, when he declared war in the Iraq War, one of the reasons why, in the final analysis at the time, as wrong as he was, and as there was all this evidence that there were not weapons of mass destruction, why he got so much support was because, from my perspective, people felt he was being authentic and doing what he genuinely believed in. And so to me, it's that authenticity that is so often lost in the conversation, and particularly with politicians in the conversation over the environment. They're afraid to say that protecting a species is important. Yes, it's important for the people, but there's also a moral obligation we have to protect this earth, not just for the people, but for those other critters who don't have our voice in the world. They're afraid to acknowledge the truth of that. They're so often they're afraid that if they speak about the importance and value of pure water and clean air and a healthy forest and a beautiful landscape and all of those things, that they're going to be made fun of. I mean, that's why a lot of people at public meetings sit down, right? Because they start getting ridiculed by their neighbors or the decision maker up on the dais is sort of rolling their eyes. And then people somehow feel that they've done something wrong, right? Or they're being ridiculed, and they sit down rather than feeling empowered and strength. Like, I am speaking this because I believe this, and feeling that strength in their soul. And I do think that constitutional recognition, I mean, helps get people over that hump. Because think about when they're talking about their gun rights or their religious rights or their property rights or their free speech rights, they're filled with indignation when those rights are tramped upon, and they rise up and they've got incredible passion and power because they've been told their whole lives that they have this right, and they really embrace it. But when it comes to the environment, when they rise up and speak out about the importance of protecting the environment, they're told that they're tree huggers, or they're eco freaks, or they're eco terrorists, or you don't care about your neighbor because if we do this, your neighbor's going to lose their jobs. And you're somehow felt that you're diminished by engaging in that environmental advocacy. And that has to do with the way we've been taught to think about the environment our whole lives. So I think that language is really important, but my concern always is the lack of authenticity from politicians, and the reality that when people try to be authentic about the environment, that they feel diminished because of the way others react to them, and somehow they respond to that and they sit down and shut up rather than feeling indignant. Like, are you kidding me? You think that there's something wrong with me fighting for the right of my child to have a clean, healthy glass of water every single day without question, right? So I hear you. I think all of these things are important. They're just different facets of it. But to me, I just think the authenticity is what gets lost. And I agree, one has to think about how to engage in the conversation with different people. But to me, it's most important that people know that you're really speaking from your heart and really speaking about something you believe in. And they will connect with that. Even if they don't really like what you're saying, they will connect with the authenticity. That's just my perspective.
That's a really interesting perspective, Maya, and I feel that because I feel you being so authentic and passionate, and I'm feeling you through these interwebs. And there's a few things that came up for me when you were talking. One, what an interesting idea that if it was an actual right, a constitutional right for the environment, then I think a lot more people would feel comfortable standing up, because they could say, well, this is a right, and they don't have to feel like they're a tree hugger or they're a hippie or they're some kind of diminished person because they care about the environment, but it's actually legal and it's constitutional and it's something that they can stand really firm on. So I thought that was a really interesting point. And then the other thing I was considering is when you were talking about authenticity and people feeling aligned to people who speak from the heart. And then I look at Trump and I go, well, how did that work? Did people think he was being authentic? Were they attracted to his demeanor, to his maybe because he's authentically full of himself or something, that they kind of were attracted to the confidence that he is. I'm not sure, so I think that's an interesting study, because I absolutely agree that you can get up on a stage, and if you are passionate and fully engage in what you're saying, people will be attracted to that. And I guess maybe Trump did have some of that. He was very engaged and felt like very confident to what he was saying, whether or not he was saying something that I would agree with. So I don't know, what your thoughts are on that. But, the other thought I was having is, so it seems like as we're exploring what actually has power in the government, in this country, people power, maybe, constitutional power, that's, seems like that's something sturdy in a way, but really what has power is money. We keep coming back, what is going to have the most power? It's because we're in a capitalist system. Who's paying the highest dollar? Who's paying for politicians? Who's paying to get the regulations, to pay for regulations to be unregulated? So how do we flip that on its head under the Trump administration, which is clearly, not to say that any other administration wasn't about money and power, but he is just so forward with his capitalist charisma and his money way. And so I go, okay, well, if we can't, of course, like we could try to get money out of politics, but, and maybe I don't even, this is maybe just a hypothetical question of, where do we go from here if we don't have the money? Where do we go from here to gain power in other ways? And maybe, Maya, you think it's illegally, like you were talking earlier. But how do we really hold firm when we don't have money and which is equals to power in the capitalist system?
So to the 2 points. So I do think that many people, of course, there's always going to be exceptions, but I do think many people did or do connect with what they think is an authenticity in Trump. And you hear it all the time. Well, he's not really a politician. I mean, all those lines you hear about why people support him and will not abandon him. It is somehow, whether we agree with it or not, it is somehow a belief in that he is being true to who he is. That's their perception of it. So I do think that it actually does play out in the Trump scenario as well. Again, of course, you're going to have exceptions, but in terms of the money, the solution that I feel is so important, the constitutional solution, we're not going to get a constitutional provision in 3 years while Donald Trump is in office. That's a reality. The movement to get a constitutional provision starts to shift the conversation and get people engaged in that mind shift that I think changes the way they think about the environment, think about environmental protection, and the way they think about who they're going to elect to office. Because they'll be thinking about that question. Are you going to, asking their politicians, when you have the opportunity, are you going to fight for the right for my child to drink a glass of clean water? Or are you going to side with the industry and their right to spew toxic pollution into the water? And so then we start voting different people into office because we're changing the way we think about these issues. And once you have a constitutional provision, it does help with the money because the Constitution is the highest law. And so when you have a law passed or an action taken by a government official that oversteps that line and invades somebody's right to clean water and healthy air, the Constitution says that a well-written, well-placed constitutional provision says we have an individual right to that healthy environment. And if the government engages in activity or allows somebody else to engage in activity that infringes on that right, I get to hop right over everything and go right to the courts to challenge that. And so it is this higher level of accountability. Near term, in terms of addressing the very important issue you raised about money and access, I think that people really are starting to do exactly what we need to do, which is people are not just mobilizing around issues, but they are pouring out into the streets. They are increasingly willing to put their bodies on the line, knowing that they're going to be hauled off and that ultimately the forest is going to be cut or, the action is going to happen. But the act of being willing to stand up and defend the environment and their communities and their families and their health is sending a powerful message across the nation. And I think we are seeing a reinvigoration of the civil rights movement, both for how people of color are being treated and how immigrants are being treated, but also about how people are being treated when it comes to their environment and the health and safety of their communities from an environmental perspective. And so I just think all of these mass uprisings and all of the organizing that is happening now is powerful and it's important. The question is, how do we direct it? We have to direct it into elections, as Samuel has said. I think we have to direct it in securing that higher level of protection and recognition on a constitutional front. And I think that we have to also continue to utilize it to push back on the decisions that are being made that are so devastating, because piece by piece we will make change, but it's not going to be dramatic and swift, but it's going to be hard fought and it is going to be hard won eventually. I think we're going to get there. I really believe in the power of what people are doing right now to get organized around all of these issues and really fight back.
And I'd like to piggyback on that because I've mentioned many a time that activism itself isn't sufficient. Organizing itself isn't sufficient. It's that action that makes a difference. And you say that people are willing to put themselves in harm's way. And I think there is a degree, there is a percentage that are willing to do that, but not nearly enough. And I think that's one of the reasons why activism in the modern era is not equivalent to the women's suffrage movement. Women died. They were murdered in the streets fighting for women's suffrage. During the civil rights movement, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were murdered fighting for the civil rights movement. There was the bombing in Detroit, if I'm not mistaken. There was all sorts of abject violence. There was actual, if not actual, warfare on our city streets fighting for these social and civil justices. We aren't there, and I don't think we're going to get there. So to simply rely on or to hope that that coalesces into something more, I don't see it happening, not just because of recent revelations, but look at the Occupy movement. Occupy Wall Street had 500,000 people show up to New York City. They shut down the entire city, and they sat down and they got maced and they got arrested and they got beaten, and it lasted for a few weeks and then it was over. Whereas the Arab Spring and the European Spring and all these uprisings in all these other countries, they overthrew their government. We just saw Catalan overthrow the Spanish government and became their own state. We are not there yet. So what we have to do is combat the apathy. And we're seeing that today in today's election, that there is more people exercising the right to vote now than at any other time during a off presidential election year. These midterms, we have to continue that momentum. It's not just activism. That gets the message out there. And it's not just organizing. That's cultivating the message. It's about using that right and exercising it to vote. And what many people don't realize, especially with these special elections that were occurring, where the voter turnout was 12%, 15%, 9%, people are just fed up with the system. So how do we combat it, right? And it's by showing them that their vote does make a difference, that it is providing some sort of tangible effect. So when we talk about combating money, yes, activism is one way to do it. It might get news, it might not. We've seen a lot of activist actions get completely ignored by the media. And so what we have to do then is to once again fall back onto ourselves. I'm going to keep hitting this point home. It has to be about working together. Each individual issue is strong by itself, but it is that much stronger if it works together. Cultivating that energy and combining it toward a forward movement that is all encompassing, working in parallel with one another rather than trying to supplant one another. That's what I've noticed. What I've noticed in all of these progressive movements and all of these sit-ins and all of these protests, they've been singular in nature. Whereas other groups, other organizations have either been pushed to the wayside or been drowned out. We cannot have conflicting interests if we want true reform. So with that being said, I agree that these things have their place. But if we're going to combat money, then we have to organize together. We have to pool our resources, our media, our social networks, even just knocking on doors together, finding out who the leadership is and getting them to understand that your movement and my movement combined is greater than the sum of the parts. So,
but nobody's doing activism for activism's sake. On the environmental front, nobody who's really thinking about it and in the movement and doing the work. People are not just going out and rallying and just to be crazy and to get media. What they're doing is they're getting organized and they're getting active to get decisions, to make change, to pass laws.
But how many of them do run for office, and how many of them do get petitions signed that are actually adhered to? That's the issue I'm saying. But
elections are a piece of it, right? Not everybody, that's not the right solution for everyone. But a lot of the activism, I've got right now a community battling successfully to prevent a highly toxic, saturated site from being only partially remediated. It's saturated with, in some of the samples come back at 1.9 micrograms per liter of TCE, a dangerous carcinogen, saturating the soil, saturating the groundwater. Whereas the standard is 5, right? So you have data points as high as 1.9 million compared to 5. And you have a developer that wanted to partially remediate, just clean up a few hot spots, not touch the groundwater, not touch the whole site, in order to develop 228 homes to bring new families to this toxic site, and then with no eye to what the full remediation and cleanup would be. So
and I'm not disagreeing that the activism isn't
Wait,
there.
hold on. No, let's not interrupt. Let's not interrupt.
So the
Maya,
point
please.
is they're getting organized and active. And what they have done successfully, or what they are doing successfully, is all the government officials that were supportive of this partial remediation and development plan now suddenly are turning and are now opposing the giving of state grants and things that would allow this to happen. And the tide is turning. So they're getting mobilized, they're getting active to accomplish change. So I just want to say is in the environmental movements that I'm a part of, nobody is getting active just to get press. They're getting active to get change. And in the process of fighting for that change, sometimes the outgrowth is getting somebody to run for office. Very often the outgrowth is a broader awareness that actually turns people out to the polls in the next election, right? And it just becomes a more developed thing. So I think everything that you're saying is true. In terms of, we need to get good people running for office and elected to office and standing up for what is right. I just think that all of these pieces have a place, and an important place, and an irreplaceable spot in this movement. And we are making forward progress. And I don't think we need to have people dying in the streets to advance very effectively our cause for fighting for the environment. I think people are being really effective. And they are rising up now in more numbers than ever before. And maybe not putting their bodies in front of a bulldozer, but they're writing the letters and they're doing the lobbying and they're showing up and they're turning out. Because being in front of the bulldozers, that's not right for everyone. Testifying at a public hearing, that's not right for everyone. We don't have space for everybody to do those things, but you need that person who it's not right, who doesn't feel comfortable rising up to testify at a public meeting. That's difficult for them, but they're willing to write those letters and seal those envelopes and do the door knocking that you're talking about, right? There's a role and a spot for all of this. And I think right now we are just seeing everybody trying to find their way. Not everybody, increasing numbers of people trying to find their way to fit in and chime in and help move the cause forward. And I just think that that's really powerful. And you're right, not everybody is doing it, and we need to get more and more people doing it. But that's part of what the empowerment movement is, on whatever issue you're working on, is we are turning out more people and getting them more engaged and letting them know that there's a spot for everybody in this fight for the earth. And we honor the different roles different people want to play.
Thank you, Maya. Yeah. Well, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation, and I know that people out there are feeling fired up and full of vigor to just go out and do their role. And I think that's so important that whoever is listening know that you are wanted and worthy and powerful in the way that you are. And that we all, I believe that for those of us who want to take action, to really believe in ourselves and find our passion, because ultimately this is a lifelong struggle. This is not something that's going to be over when Trump gets out of office. This isn't going to, climate change, the fossil fuels that we've been burning for the last 100 years, industrialization. We are going to be dealing with the consequences of the Anthropocene definitely for my whole life. So if you're not impassioned by what you're doing, you're not going to be able to wake up every day to keep fighting this fight and sitting and standing in the struggle. So I also want to say that we're here to support each other. And for those people who are the support systems to the people on the front lines, thank you. If you're the people that are, cooking and making medicine, and we don't all have to be the kind of aggressive figures. And I want people to know that too. I really believe that. And at the same time, being involved really forcefully is important, and that can mean a lot of things. And I think the tree sitters, for instance, are some of my biggest heroes, the people that give their life to sit in trees and have violence put upon them, or the people at Standing Rock of the No Dapple movement who were on the front lines, who did get injured because they were willing to put their bodies on the line. And what a powerful statement that was for the whole globe to see that. Derek Jensen, who's one of just an incredible author, he talks about if you're a human, or if you're a bear, if you're an animal and somebody's coming onto your territory or going to hurt your cubs, you will fight to the death to protect what is yours, what your land, your food, your family. And I think learning from the natural world, that kind of commitment to Earth, that commitment to each other, that we will stop at nothing to protect what we love. And what an incredible way to be alive in this time. So there's a lot to be done politically under the Trump administration and going forward. I look at the Trump administration as a horrendous thing, but it's not as if we were environmentally and socially just before. It's not as if a lot has changed. We are still in this intense moment. So I think that there's a lot to be done, a lot to be politicized over, to get involved with, and I hope more and more people take up their passion piece and run with it. So this has been, like I said, an incredible conversation, and if you could both just speak to where people can find you, your book, Sam, your campaign, so that our listeners can keep following up on the amazing work that you both are doing.
Why don't we let Sam go first, seeing as it's election day, right?
Well, so my election's coming up the primary election's coming up in May in 2018. But neither here nor there. You can find me at Ronan for Progress on Twitter, the number 4 Progress, and then on Facebook, Ronan FOR Congress. And then let's see, what else do we got here? My website, www.ronanforcongress.com, and you can just find all the other social media throughout. I look forward to everybody's ongoing support. These conversations are necessary. They keep giving a good, well-rounded perspective of what's going out there, whether it's activism, whether it's organizing, whether it's getting out the vote, or even running for office. These are the things that we need to be doing together, laterally, and in parallel, rather than working on our own individual efforts apart. And that's my main message is, no matter what you do, as your congressman, I will fight for you. Whether there's an R next to my name, a D next to my name, nothing next to my name. Samuel Ronan fights for people. And that's the bottom line. So come closer to May, hopefully I get to be on here again and spread the good word and tell you all how well my campaign's going. Thank you.
Thanks,
So
Sam.
Ayanna, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this. This has been really fascinating. I've really enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed talking with Samuel about all these issues and with you about these issues. The book is coming out. It's called The Green Amendment, and it comes out in next week, November 14th. People can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and at independent booksellers. If people want to know more about the movement to get green amendments, there's a special initiative website called forthegenerations.org, FORTHE generations.org. And if people just want to know more about me and my work as the Delaware Riverkeeper, it's delawareriverkeeper.org. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. And for all you out there, if you've missed the beginning, this will be on the For the Wild Facebook page live. It will also be on the website, forthewild.world. And you can go there, watch this webinar, other reactive webinars to come. We have a webinar next week about the Arctic. Winona LaDuke is coming up tomorrow on the podcast. And there are more updates on the 1 Million Redwoods Project for redwood reforestation. So please go join, sign up for our newsletter to find out more updates coming along, and give a donation, as this is a listener and people-supported organization. So thank you all so much. Bye for now.